Imagine you're trapped in a trench, and everyone around you is dying. Your radio is destroyed. Your phone lines are cut. You're completely surrounded, and nobody knows where you are. Your only hope of survival is a bird, not a helicopter, not a plane, a pigeon. And here's the crazy part. It actually worked. These birds saved thousands of lives and changed the outcome of battles. This is the story of the most unlikely heroes of World War I. October 1918, or the Argonne Forest in France. Major Charles Whittlesey and his battalion of 550 American soldiers were about to walk into a nightmare. They pushed deep into German territory. Way too deep. The units on their left and right fell back, but nobody told Whittlesey, so he kept going forward. By the time he realized what happened, it was too late. The Germans had surrounded them completely. They were trapped on a hillside with no food, no water, and no way to call for help. The men started calling themselves the Lost Battalion, and they were about to find out that being lost was just the beginning of their problems. The Germans attacked from every direction. Machine gun fire ripped through the trees. Mortars exploded all around them. Men were dying every hour. Whittlesey tried to send runners through the German lines to get help. Every single one was killed or captured. He had no radio. The telephone wires were all cut. The Lost Battalion was completely cut off from the outside world. But Whittlesey had one last option. He had carrier pigeons, and he was about to send one on the most important flight in military history. Now you might be thinking, pigeons? Really? But here's what you need to understand. In World War I, communication was almost impossible. This war was fought in massive muddy trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles. You couldn't just pick up a cell phone and call for backup. Radios were huge and unreliable. They weighed 90 pounds and barely worked. Telephone lines got blown up by artillery. Every single day, running messages by hand meant certain death. Soldiers had to cross open ground while machine guns fired at them. The survival rate was terrible, so the military turned to an ancient solution: birds. Pigeons had been carrying messages for thousands of years. The Romans used them. Genghis Khan used them. They have an incredible ability to find their way home from anywhere. Scientists still don't fully understand how they do it. They can sense the Earth's magnetic field. They use the sun and stars to navigate. They can even smell their way home. And they're fast. A pigeon can fly 60 miles per hour. Nothing in World War I could catch them. Not planes. Not bullets. Well, sometimes bullets, but most of the time, these birds made it through when everything else failed. British Army had 20,000 pigeons. The French had even more. The American Army created the Pigeon Service and brought thousands of birds to the front lines. Every battalion got a basket of pigeons. Soldiers carried them into battle in special containers. When you needed to send a message, You wrote it on a tiny piece of paper. You rolled it up and put it in a small metal tube. Then you attached the tube to the pigeon's leg. You threw the bird into the air and hoped it made it home. And most of the time, it did. These birds had a 95% success rate. That's better than any technology they had. But back to the Lost Battalion. Things were getting desperate. The men had been trapped for 3 days. They were running out of ammunition. The wounded were dying because there were no medical supplies. And then something happened that made everything worse. American artillery started firing at them. Their own side was shelling them. The commanders, back at headquarters, didn't know where Whittlesey was. They thought the Lost Battalion was somewhere else. So they were accidentally killing their own men. Whittlesey had to get a message through. He had to tell them to stop firing. He only had one pigeon left. Her name was Cher Ami, and she was about to become the most famous bird in American history. Whittlesey wrote the message. It said, "We are along the road, parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." He attached the message to Cher Ami's leg. Soldiers gathered around. They knew this was their last chance. Whittlesey released the bird into the air, and immediately the Germans started shooting at her. They knew what carrier pigeons meant. If that bird made it through, the Americans would know where to send help. German soldiers fired rifles at her. Machine guns opened up. The sky filled with bullets. Cher Ami flew up and circled around. She seemed confused. The noise and smoke were disorienting. She landed back in the trench. The soldiers panicked. If she didn't fly, the battalion would die. Whittlesey picked her up and threw her into the air again. This time, Cher Ami took off. She flew straight up through the storm of bullets. Germans fired everything they had. And then suddenly, Cher Ami dropped. The soldiers thought she was hit. They thought it was over. But then she started flying again. She climbed higher and higher till she disappeared into the clouds. The men watched her go. They didn't know if she would make it. All they could do was wait and hope. Cher Ami flew 25 miles back to headquarters. It took her less than 30 minutes. When she landed, the soldiers there couldn't believe what they saw. She was covered in blood. It was hanging by a tendon, but the message tube was still attached. She had delivered the message. The commanders read Whittlesey's note and immediately stopped the artillery fire. And they sent forces to rescue the Lost Battalion. 2 days later, American troops broke through and saved the survivors. Out of 550 men, only 194 walked out alive, but they all would have died without Cher Ami. That little pigeon saved almost 200 lives. The army medics performed surgery on Cher Ami. They couldn't save her leg, so they carved her a tiny wooden leg. She became a hero. General Pershing personally awarded her the French Croix de Guerre Medal for bravery. She was only the second animal in history to receive it. The Americans brought her back to the US, and she became famous nationwide. Sadly, she died less than a year later from her wounds, but they didn't forget her. They stuffed and mounted her body. Today, you can see Cher Ami at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. She stands there as a reminder that sometimes the smallest creatures show the biggest courage. But Cher Ami wasn't the only hero. There were thousands of pigeons who did incredible things in World War I. Pigeon named Kaiser saved a French garrison that was completely surrounded. He flew through a gas attack. The poison gas blinded him, but he still made it home. Another pigeon named President Wilson carried a message across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, not exactly across, but he flew further than any pigeon in the war. The British had a pigeon named Paddy who flew through a thunderstorm to deliver a message that saved 2,000 men. These birds flew through fire, through gas, through storms, through everything the war threw at them. The Germans knew how dangerous these pigeons were. They trained hawks to hunt them. They stationed marksmen with rifles at pigeon lofts just to shoot the birds when they arrived. They even tried to train their own pigeons to intercept Allied messages. Nothing worked. The pigeons were too fast and too determined. French estimated that pigeons delivered messages with 95% accuracy. Radio and telephone systems were lucky to hit 50%. In the chaos of World War I, these birds were the most reliable form of communication anyone had. Here's something most people don't know. Pigeons didn't just carry messages. They carried tiny cameras. Military strapped small cameras to their chests and sent them over enemy lines. The cameras took automatic photos every few seconds. Pigeons would fly over German trenches and fortifications, taking pictures the whole way. When they got back, the military developed the film and used it to plan attacks. It was basically the world's first surveillance drone, except it was a bird from 1918. Germans had no way to stop it. By the time they spotted the pigeon, it was already gone. The pigeons had one major advantage over humans. They didn't panic. A soldier under fire might freeze or run the wrong way. A pigeon just flew home. Didn't matter if bombs were exploding. It didn't matter if the sky was full of shrapnel. Pigeon's brain had one mission: get home. And it followed that mission no matter what. Military commanders loved this. They knew they could count on the birds, even when everything else failed. A pigeon wouldn't desert. It wouldn't surrender. It wouldn't get scared and hide. It would just fly. Training these pigeons was serious business. The Pigeon Service built special lofts near the front lines. These lofts became home for the birds. Pigeons always fly back to their home loft. That's the secret. You raise them in one place and then take them to the battlefield. When you release them, they fly back home. You had to train them gradually. First, you'd take them half a mile away and release them. Then a mile, and 5 miles, then 10. By the time they went to war, these birds could find their way home from anywhere, even if they'd never been there before. Even if they were wounded, even if they were dying, they would fly home. Soldiers who handled the pigeons were called pigeoneers. It sounds funny, but it was a crucial job. These men took care of hundreds of birds. They fed them. They trained them. They made sure each bird was healthy and ready to fly. When a battalion went into battle, the pigeoneers went with them. They carried the birds in special backpacks or baskets. During an attack, the pigeoneers would set up a mobile loft right behind the front lines. When a commander needed to send a message, the pigeoneer would prepare the bird and send it off. A good pigeoneer could launch a pigeon in under a minute. Speed mattered because the situation could change fast. Some pigeons became celebrities. There was a British pigeon named Royal Blue who delivered 20 critical messages during the war. Every single time he made it through. The French had a pigeon named Vaillant who flew through a poison gas cloud. He died minutes after delivering his message, but the message saved an entire company. Another pigeon named Mocker carried a message that led to the capture of a German spy network. The spy network had been causing damage for months. One pigeon flight ended the whole operation. The Germans tried everything to stop the pigeons. They set up fake lofts, hoping the birds would land there by mistake. It never worked. They used searchlights at night to blind the birds. The pigeons just flew higher. They even tried using trained falcons. But carrier pigeons are faster than falcons over long distances. Plus, the pigeons flew in all weather: rain, snow, fog, conditions that wound a falcon. The Germans captured thousands of Allied pigeons during the war. They interrogated soldiers to find out where the lofts were located. They offered rewards to civilians who reported seeing pigeons. None of it made much difference. The birds kept flying, and the messages kept getting through. By the end of World War I, pigeons had delivered over 95% of all battlefield communications. Think about that. Almost every important message that saved lives or won battles was carried by a bird. Cher Ami alone is credited with saving 194 men. Thousands of other pigeons saved just as many. We don't know their names. We don't have records of every flight, but we know they were there in every major battle, at every critical moment. These birds were flying through hell to deliver messages that mattered. After the war, most of the pigeons were retired. Some went to farms. Some went to civilian pigeon clubs. A few stayed with the military for training purposes, but their moment had passed. Technology was catching up. Radios got smaller and more reliable. Communication systems improved. By World War II, pigeons were still used, but not as much, and after that, they disappeared from military service almost completely. Today, the military uses satellites and encrypted radios and drones, but none of those technologies have a 95% success rate under combat conditions. The Pigeons did. With 1918 technology, Cher Ami's body still sits in the Smithsonian. Thousands of people walk past her every year. Most of them have no idea what she did. They see a stuffed bird in a glass case. They don't see the hero who flew through bullets and gas and explosions. They don't see the bird who refused to give up, even when she was dying. They don't imagine 194 men watching the sky and praying that one small pigeon would make it home. But that's exactly what happened. And it happened thousands of times during World War I. These birds were heroes. They saved lives. They won battles. And most people have completely forgotten about them. So the next time you see a pigeon in a park, remember this story. Those birds aren't just annoying animals that eat trash. They're the descendants of heroes. Their ancestors changed history. They flew through the worst war humanity had ever seen, and they did their job perfectly. No hesitation, no fear, just pure determination to get home. The soldiers who fought in World War I knew what these birds meant. They trusted them with their lives, and the pigeons never let them down. That's not just interesting, that's incredible. Now you know the truth. Sometimes the smallest heroes make the biggest difference. If you found this story amazing, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten history. What other World War stories do you want to hear about? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. 2.